The Joe Rogan misinformation conflagration continues, and we ask you today, is it really the mainstream media that has a misinformation problem? Welcome, you 4.9 million shimmering wonders, you glorious miracles. Here we are together, open, free, communicating, asking questions, inquiring, casting aside old boundaries, refusing to condemn or judge other people on the basis of how they identify or who they are, and looking for new forms of alliance. This channel is growing into something of which we are very proud, and necessarily we have to talk about complicated subjects that dominate the news cycle, like the Joe Rogan misinformation stroke racist language situation. He has apologized for both of those things, and of course on this channel we condemn misinformation and racism outright. Absolutely. We've got a fantastic story here by the brilliant David Sirota from the Daily Poster talking about misinformation and how the mainstream media, and we mean those guys that I know you like so much, look at me, look at my tie nut, look how shimmering and shiny I am, how dare you condemn me, smarter than the average newscaster. Let's see what David Sirota, he's a brilliant writer, he's just been nominated for an Oscar. Let's have a look what he's got to say. Misinformation is all the rage these days. It's the topic du jour. That's French. Polls suggest we all agree that it's a problem, and lately liberals appear most mad at it, but seemingly only at certain kinds of misinformation that originate outside the corporate media sphere. That's right, isn't it? Sometimes do you think that there are matters and issues that are important and true, and the dominator culture recognises that it's true, that actually deep down, none of us want to live in a racist society. None of us agree that racist language is right. So when they get an opportunity to mobilise around that, we have to question, is it really the racism you care about, like we all care about racism and ensuring that we live in a fair, equal and just society? Or is this a kind of opportunism? That's a question that I'm offering to you. You can tell me in the comments below what you feel. I'm interested in what you feel. Notably, the ire is rarely directed at a corporate media machine that systematically rewards and praises the purveyors of misleading propaganda and continues to flood the country with information sewage. This selective outrage is a huge problem because the only way to systematically combat misinformation is to construct a fourth estate that develops some trust with the audience. That trust will never be rebuilt if liberals pretend to hate misinformation while they patronise a media establishment that fortifies the pathologies that originally created a credibility crisis. Right, that's an important sentence, isn't it? Because what it leads you to is the idea that hypocrisy is rife when it comes to the discussion of this subject. Misinformation means that you've been told something that isn't true or requires additional context or should have a counterpoint offered alongside it. But if that's true for Joe Rogan or other people outside of the mainstream media, then surely it must be true for the mainstream media. Otherwise, they'll be free to operate along the lines established by a set of biases that will doubtlessly include the service of the ideals of powerful establishment institutions, whether they be corporate and financial or governmental, i.e. they're sponsored by Big Pharma, they're sponsored by big business, they work in regulatory liaison with the government, so they'll tell particular types of truths. That is misinformation. Consider the past week of media news while the Joe Rogan controversy dominated the headlines. And no one's saying that racism isn't important or racist language isn't important. We're saying that there are other things that are important that might really impact the lives of ordinary people. Ordinary working people of all races, religions and forms of identification will be negatively impacted by some of the news stories that Sirota is about to list. NBC hired Stephen Hayes, one of the key architects of Iraq war misinformation, to serve as a political analyst across all of its properties amid a media drumbeat for war with Russia. Okay, so do you remember now? We know what the Iraq War was. Loads of American service people died. Loads of Iraqi children died. It created a power vacuum in Iraq that led to the rise of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. I mean, what a bloody disaster. What a total disaster that was built on misinformation. In our country, they told us that there were weapons of mass destruction. They sexed up, famously, a document to make it sound more legitimate in encouraging a conflict in that region. And it just wasn't true through it all. And that was the government in liaison with the media in order to service the interests of, you could argue, big business, in particular, obviously, the energy industry and the military industrial complex. Now, that cost hundreds of thousands of people their lives. Is that, you tell me in the comments below, something that you care about? And do you think mainstream media organisations that support that kind of data, i.e. aka misinformation, should be vociferously condemning Joe Rogan for flaws and errors that he has made, when they could actually go, do you know what, we've been doing this as well, so we're going to stop it? No. In fact, they're inflating the Joe Rogan crisis so that behind it they can go, hey, you guys, do you guys want to support a war? Do you guys support Big Pharma? That appears to be what's happening. It's being used to obfuscate darker truths. Despite Hayes publishing the seminal book amplifying one of the most egregious lies of the Iraq debacle, NBC's Chuck Todd lauded him as a principled reporter and analyst who always puts truth and facts above emotion and sentiment. There's emotion and sentiment, there's truth and facts, there's a bunch of dead Iraqi children. Welcome to the show! Meanwhile, CNN just hired another Iraq war proponent, right-wing propagandist Jonah Goldberg. Out of all this stuff, this maelstrom, if we don't end up with, not only do people that have got podcasts and that have to watch the misinformation, so do the mainstream media, so do CNN, Fox, MSNBC. They've all got to watch it and pull their shit together. They got to get it together. If it doesn't end up with that, then we know what it was, don't we? We know it was a false storm to bring down opponents. So unless this ends with Jen Psaki turning up behind the podium and saying, right, okay, we're going to nip this in the bud, it's got out of hand. They've all been doing misinformation. Rachel Maddow said a bunch of stuff that's not true. These people have said stuff that's not true. Joe Rogan. Otherwise, it's not that there's a universal principle. It's the mobilization of a convenient principle to attack potential competitors. Speaking of CNN, its employees effusively praised their network's recently deposed president, Jeff Zucker, even after Zucker oversaw the lionization of Andrew Cuomo, while the New York governor was shielding his healthcare industry donors from liability for COVID-related deaths and injuries. This week, corporate media began touting a comeback for Cuomo and his brother Chris, as if nothing bad happened over the last 2 years. An MSNBC platform Washington newsletter blasted out propaganda touting grocery chain Kroger's great pay and benefits, even as thousands of its employees are struggling to afford basic necessities, and even as the grocery chain bankrolls lobbying groups working to kill union rights legislation. That means that MSNBC are curating information in a way that's favourable to their allies, that's literally not favourable to ordinary American workers. So really, that, again, that's vitally important. This is the stuff all of us get sort of turned on by celebrity information, don't we? Oh, wow, what that person done, what's happened, this story. But we got to grow up a little bit, start focusing on things that affect our lives, because we can't rely on the media to be sort of an honest, open, clear channel of Christ-like truth directly from the limitless. They're just going to tell you stuff that benefits them financially and suits their allies who fund them. MSNBC aired an interview with a New York Times columnist blaming inflation on workers getting COVID relief money rather than on corporations using their monopoly power to fleece consumers with higher prices that then fund giant executive pay packages and shareholder dividends. That's MSNBC, man, who are like really positioning themselves. Hello, we're your friends over on the left, standing up for the little guy. Airing an interview with someone who blamed inflation on workers receiving COVID relief money, so presumably that's people that are pretty desperate, rather than pointing out that there have also been giant executive pay packages and shareholder dividends. That's deliberately pushing an anti-wealth transfer narrative. Poor people being blamed, rich people taking the money. That's wealth transfer. That's it right there. That's misinformation. That's misinformation that's really important. Obviously, multiple wrongs don't make a right. Rogan using racial slurs is not somehow absolved by corporate media concurrently immersing the world in an ocean of self-serving bullshit. But corporate media doesn't get to lie the country into a war and a financial crisis, offer up news literally presented by corporate villains, and then pretend that a podcaster is the singular source of misinformation. And it sure as hell doesn't get to feign surprise when after decades of lies, almost nobody ends up trusting corporate media about anything. Despite crocodile tears about free speech, none of the central players in the hullabaloo are heroes or victims. They're all making a mint of selling controversy, garbage, and fake outrage. And it's hardly a surprise that the loudest of them screaming about censorship have little to say about the most pervasive censorship of all: corporate media's near complete erasure of economic and anti-corruption reporting that might offend business sponsors. That's the most important censorship, isn't it? Imagine if instead of corporatism, it was a religious ideology that governed a nation and they wouldn't allow reporting on matters that affected their religious beliefs. How is this different from that? We live in a fundamentalist ideological state that prohibits honest reporting about the negative impact of its activities and beliefs. We've just listed, thanks to Sirota's reporting, 3 examples where information is presented in a certain way. So the kind of salacious, vindictive, vengeful condemnation of the admittedly wrong things that Joe Rogan said, and even in the misinformation case you might believe has done, is underwritten by their own biases and a strong desire to distract you from their own malpractice, if not outright malfeasance. The real victim here is the general public. We need a fourth estate that does not reward peddlers of the most outrageous lies, like, say, a Saddam Al-Qaeda connection with prominent gigs. We need television networks whose anchors don't run out onto the airwaves to defend top brass amid reports that they help politicians and political operatives effectively cover up a public health disaster. And we need an information infrastructure that preferences accurate, verifiable and indisputable facts so that the public can make informed decisions. I know that's what you want. I read the comments. I know that what you want is not to think about left or right or other ideological biases. I know that you, like me, are just over it when it comes to those political movements. You just want to be given the truth and make the decisions for yourself. That's what a democracy would be. We believe this, I believe this. I know loads of you don't agree with me on loads of things, and I respect you for it. That's why I have conversations with people from a wide variety of political and religious and ideological and academic backgrounds on my podcast, because I'm trying to understand reality. I don't start from the assumption, I'm right, now let me find why everyone else is wrong so I can condemn them without ever looking at my own shadow and the things that I need to work out in myself. That's an emotional, psychological and ideological shift that needs to be made at large on the level of the individual, and we can take responsibility for that. But when it comes to the media, it's pretty clear from this article and from your own understanding that what we have is a willingness to condemn a convenient scapegoat, even though there's clear evidence of some wrongdoing, and not confront their own ongoing, necessary, institutionalized negligence and downright negativity, because they can't address it because it would end their business model forever. They have to pour fuel on that fire, because the minute we turn to, so what are you guys up to? It's over. We don't have much of that right now, in part because political tribalism has taught audiences to selectively love and hate misinformation based on whether it comes from their team. We got to get over that. Many liberals love monikers like Believe Science and see themselves as dispassionate protectors of the truth. But let's be clear, if you're a liberal who purports to hate misinformation but also cheers on Liz Cheney or Bill Kristol or some other war propagandist as a beacon of integrity just because you see them defending Democrats or bashing Donald Trump on your favourite TV network, then you don't actually hate misinformation, you just happen to like your misinformation coloured blue, even if that misinformation was previously coloured neocon red. So when it comes to Pentagon spending and the funding of the military-industrial complex from public funding, neither party is going to talk about that. And as Chomsky, who's God knows where he is he left or right now, he used to say, in all matters where both sides agree, you have no choice at all. And the reality is, whether it comes to media reporting or political action, with the most important matters, you got no choice at all. That's why they have to inflate and fuel debate around everything else so that we don't collectively go, deep breath, right. Now, what actually matters when it comes to me living my life and us as a community living together and the acceptance of the fact that we're going to have to get along with people that are different, some people that are traditional, some people that are progressive. We're going to have to get on. So what we're going to do, just keep bashing our skulls against one another till the end of time, or are we going to turn and face a direction where if there was meaningful and reasonable action, it would actually improve all of our experiences here temporarily on this planet where limitless love may not be possible, but improvement definitely is. And if you're in corporate media and think it's okay for your news outlet to routinely skew and cover up the crimes of politicians and business, then you're not actually interested in journalism's mission to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. The difference between media and actual journalism is the root of the misinformation crisis. We're drowning in content that is increasingly valued only for its potency in the political wars, rather than judged on its factual merits and its choice of targets. That kind of media content strays farther and farther from reality because it's about entertaining and inflaming rather than educating and informing. The answer to misinformation then is not some censorship regime, and it's not more intense fan culture around individual media icons so that everything is a self-enriching culture war between cable TV pundits and Spotify hosts. The answer is an audience that actually values accurate and necessary information, even if it offends their preconceived notions. An audience that runs away from corporate media outlets that force feed them lies and liars, and runs toward news organisations that report hard truths. It's going to take a long time to build a true, independent and trustworthy fourth estate in the wreckage of a corporate media landscape where the flames of bullshit smoulder and suffocate the discourse. But that's the only way forward. Well, are we on that journey together to the establishment of that exact kind of discourse where right-wing, left-wing, Republican, Democrat, Labour, Conservative, religious, atheistic, all are willing to come together and accept that the person that you're staring at and shouting at is just the same as you when it comes to the most important matters and shares the interests and values that are going to determine and define your life, and that we have to be willing to move forward together because you as an individual have something special and powerful inside you, and if you can realise that, then it won't matter so much about these petty indiscrepancies and differences that are continually inflated to keep us from seeing the truth. We have more in common than we have that divides us. It's our duty to support one another because in reality we do have an enemy, but now we know who it is. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Give this video a like, subscribe to my channel. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at this one. If you want to learn a little more about spirituality, sign up to my Awakening Side channel. Click here to subscribe to my newsletter, then I can keep in touch with you. Every week I send out an email telling you what I'm up to. Like, for example, I'm touring the UK in March, April, May, doing fantastic live shows. Newcastle, Bristol, Plymouth, Glasgow, all over the gaff. Come see me. Stay free.